Good afternoon, everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to what is now the 5th in our series, Network Ed, Technology in Education. First of all, before I introduce our speaker today, I'd just like to say a little bit about the technology. One of the reasons for organising these seminars is not only to hear some very interesting and enlightening speakers, but also to give the school the opportunity to experiment with some technologies which previously it hadn't used. The downside of that, of course, means that inevitably we start 10 minutes late because we have a last-minute panic when things don't quite work. And today is no exception. However, I think, touch wood, most things seem to be working. I've put up on screen the Network Ed page from the CLT blog, and you can see on it there's a link to stream the webcast. I'm going to kill that now because it's going to give feedback otherwise. And so if you're off-site, you can watch it being streamed. There's also another link below, which is our new technology for today, which is the launch of the Echo live stream. Now, many of you will be familiar with the Echo 360 lecture recording system, which we have in the school. We've recorded something like 3,500 lectures in the past year, and we're often recording 70 or 80 a day. But what this does is that it enables us, if we so choose, to live stream a lecture. This, of course, means the students never need get out of bed and they can just sit at home and watch it. The intention, of course, is not for that. The intention is that where there are situations where you want to open up your lecture to a specific group, perhaps you have a course with another institution, or you have a particular group of students or ex-students or others who you'd like to watch and see the lecture, we can open it up so that they can watch a live stream of that event. And because it's coming out of the new Echo boxes like this, it'll be available in a number of locations within the school, the large lecture theatres basically. So potentially I think this is going to be very useful. Okay, so that's something new for today. So if you're watching off campus, or if you've got a device here, you can flick through it and see the Echo live stream. I won't, because I'll cause this massive horrible feedback loop again at the front, but please take my word for it. Beyond that, we're using Twitter, as you can see below, where people who are off campus can tweet in. Later on they'll be asking questions, etc., and we'll be following then. Okay, on to perhaps the important part of the day. It's my great pleasure indeed to introduce Patrick Dunleavy. Patrick is Professor of Political Science and Public Policy here at the LSE and author of very many books on politics and government and related topics. He also wrote a very influential book on writing a PhD, which generations of PhD students use, I'm sure they still do, which has been very helpful to them. But today, and in the context of today, Patrick has been very instrumental in encouraging the use of blogs within the school, and particularly group blogs. It is in that context he's going to speak. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Patrick, who will talk on the topic of the Republic of Blogs, a new phase in the development, democratization, critique and application of knowledge. Patrick.
So you can get me to my slides, right?
I can get you to your slides. I knew I had a purpose apart from that. I took my glasses off, let me put them back on again.
That's okay, I can
get
from here.
To there, okay. I won't bother.
That's fine. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be whizzing through a huge number of slides. But most of them probably things that you could sort of chase up afterwards if you want to. Virtually everything that is on here has got a hyperlink behind it. So if you want to sort of chase it up afterwards and see what it all is doing. I'm a big fan of blogs, along with Chris Gilson, who's sitting over there and is actually the brains behind every blog I've ever done. So don't think I'm technically up to speed, because I'm not. Chris does it all, and we've been developing a whole series of blogs, and that's really what I want to talk about. And also the importance of blogging in the current changing times, because we're on the peak of a change from an old academic paradigm, which is still lurking around and oppressing young people on tenure tracks, but is about to shift, I hope. So really I want to try and situate blogging in a kind of slightly larger academic landscape, and to try and show that although these things at one level are very simple to do and easy to implement, at another level they have very considerable implications for the whole way in which we do research, especially research. A little bit later on we need to think about teaching. I've been talking to people today about a massive open online course that would link to our blogs, but we haven't got very far with that. So it's mainly a research kind of focus today, and particularly the idea of opening up research to lots and lots of people. So these are the bits I'm going to talk about. The Republic of Blogs concept is an explicit reference back to a period that stretched from the late 1500s through to about 1800, known as the Republic of Letters. And that was a period when a whole series of free-ranging intellectuals outside universities who were very fed up with universities really changed the whole course of science and academia as we know it. So it's a rather grandiloquent reference, but that's really what I'm trying to get across today, that the Republic of Blogs could be as salient and significant and very parallel to the Republic of Letters. And I'll just say a few words about why I think current higher education is in a bit of a deep crisis from which we need to really move very fast to recover from where we are. And then most of the talk will be about a particular kind of blog, which Chris and I are huge exponents of, called multi-author blogs. And I was looking at the blog entry in Wikipedia yesterday, so I thought I'd just check, because I know what I think a blog is, but I thought I'd look and see what Wikipedia said. And the opening line said, a blog is a personal journal on a website. And I so completely disagreed with that I had to change the Wikipedia entry in my usual ham-fisted way. It's probably gone back to that already, but anyway, I did my best. And then at the end, I'll just outline really where multi-author blogs can help push us onto our new agenda, which has many, many different dimensions. So the Republic of Letters, I'm going to steal everything I say about academic development from this particular book, which is a really interesting book by McNeely and Wolverton called Reinventing Knowledge. And it has like 8 big things that have really helped academic knowledge. I think it's only got 7 anyway. But so starting in the ancient period, the invention of libraries, which were, you know, where you did academic work before universities existed, particularly the ancient Library of Alexandria and various other initiatives, which had a great way of operating, which is if you visited Alexandria, we search your baggage and then take all your books off you and copy them all. And then we give them back to you, or maybe we give you the copy, depending on how generous we're feeling. So it was a great way of, but the essential thing was it was a passive knowledge store, but it very quickly built up. And then there's an interesting chapter in this book about monasteries, which I don't know if any of you have ever read a book by Ian Stevenson called Anathem. Anybody ever read that? It's all about how academic work is destined in the future to be undertaken only in monasteries because of the naughty things that science has done and the very low regard in which it's held. Anyway, monasteries were a kind of way of taking academic knowledge and hiding it away and binding it round with lots of religious and other preclusions, so as to create a kind of safe haven where knowledge could be preserved in very, very difficult times. And then universities were founded partly with the growth of cities and the development of things like legal systems that couldn't be bound by the sort of traditional religious monastic knowledge. And universities flourished for a while and then became completely corrupt for many centuries. And they were deeply corrupt because they were only attended by the aristocracy. Sounds a bit familiar. Because they only trained people for a particular profession, being a vicar or being an aristocrat, because they had a very restrictive attitude to new knowledge. They were against innovation, and because they became obsessed with a particular scholastic method. And so really around about the late 1500 to 1800, we have a period when the whole thrust of intellectual advance moved out of universities, wasn't undertaken within universities, essentially undertaken by intelligent laymen. They were mostly men, unfortunately. This was the Enlightenment period, and the way in which it operated was essentially based on correspondence and corresponding societies, scientific societies that collated information from all over the place and information from lots and lots of different individuals doing their own experiments, usually reasonably wealthy people, but often not. And it had, you know, the Republic of Letters was an impressive thing because it spanned across a deep religious divide in Europe, and it spanned across many, many different national wars. Everybody was fighting everybody else in varying combinations for this whole period. It spanned across the growth of absolutism and the creation of the nation state, and it managed to keep the whole process of intellectual development, which was otherwise crumbling away in the universities, in being in a very international, interesting way. So this is a map. If you want to learn more about the Republic of Letters, there's a great website at the University of Stanford. The address is up there. And this is just a picture of several nodes in the thing. You can see that although Britain and France were deadly enemies, that was the main burden of the thing. The website also sort of gives you an idea of what the level of correspondence was, but it was massive and incredibly impressive. Makes my email account look like child's play comparison. Here's two different correspondence nets. I'm sorry that the Stanford designers have made the map so faint you can't see it at all. But this one is the network for John Locke, and this is the network for Voltaire. So you can see it a little bit better on a TV screen, but don't let designers ever design your website. They always forget about making things just visible, you know. But anyway, so the question is, what is it about contemporary higher education that makes me see any kind of parallel between the Republic of Letters and the Republic of Blogs? Well, you've probably all got your own lists of what's wrong with higher education, so I'm just going to run through mine. And to do that, we need to just think about what happened after the Republic of Letters in the development of academic knowledge. And absolutely the key and dominant thing that happened was in Germany with the invention of modern disciplines, which really got started at the University of Göttingen and then kicked off all around Germany, particularly during the later 19th century. So this is where we got seminars from, this is where we got a kind of rigorous attention to referencing and academic detail. In fact, a lot of people think that disciplines came from the science disciplines, but they didn't. Disciplines developed first in classics in Germany, and then in philology. There's even an important point where Nietzsche is making fun of people who have PhDs and compares them to philologists who know about grinding. They have to be really boring people, according to Nietzsche. So actually it was classics and philology that created disciplines in Germany, and then they extended to the scientific disciplines a lot later on. And then they reached the humanities to some degree. Of course, they haven't got totally through the humanities yet. The second big thing was much more science, and was the invention of the laboratory and controlled field experiments. Actually, if you look at McNeely and Wolverton's book, you'll find that they start off about laboratories and then they stop talking about laboratories and start talking about the early development of social science, which is, to my mind, not anything to do related to a laboratory. So I've sort of changed their scheme by adding in social data and social control as key late 19th century developments, and now we have the impact of digitization, which we're trying to make some sense of. But the big culprits here are disciplines. So the overdevelopment of academic disciplines, the siloing of knowledge, the specialization of knowledge, one field from another, the generally reductionist method of reasoning which goes along with disciplines, which is, let's break the thing up into smaller and smaller bits and understand less and less. And of course, some of the big problems of disciplines can be witnessed in the current fiscal crises of the state that is rampaging through Western capitalism. So that's my first thing. Existing academic life is terribly, terribly siloed in hugely counterproductive ways. Secondly, of course, it's become more and more esoteric, partly because of mathematicization of disciplines, which is still going on across the social sciences, partly because of increased complexity, especially in human-dominated systems, which are both social and technical. So we have really a sort of three cultures problem now. The old C.P. Snow thing was two cultures, people who understand maths and the people who didn't. The three cultures thing is the people who understand maths, the people who don't understand maths or anything else, and the people who understand that, for example, an economy is not the same as a household. People who can follow Paul Krugman on Newsnight, and the people who can't, basically. So it's a sort of a three cultures problem, which puts, unfortunately, most of the Conservative Party in the know-nothing camp, but never mind, we won't get there. Then we've got this huge problem of the penetration of finance in different ways into universities and the potential for corruption that comes from that. Both the corporate finance problem that you have, for example, most medical articles now are written by, they've got like 10 people who are nominally the authors, haven't written a word of it. It's written by a professional PhD writer who's given it to a professional PhD editor who's working in a factory, a word factory, that's financed by a big pharma company. We've moved a huge long way away in the physical sciences away from what we're supposed to be, what we still think of as in the social sciences as the model of academic work. And of course we've got the bureaucratization of academic work and things like the REF, which is still, assembling 200,000 research outputs, which allegedly they are going to assess, and then they're going to assess 5,000 impact case studies. Well, if you believe all of that, good luck to you, is all I can say. They'll just eyeball it. Anyway, then we have the problem of credentialization, which is that we have to ration out jobs somehow, and the way we've decided to do it, pseudo-meritocratic way, is to relate job access to educational credentials, and that has helped to fuel and sustain a massive rise in the cost of education, and obviously we're going through that at the moment, and we're locked into that, I think. All of these things are undesirable, which isn't to say that I necessarily think we can get out of them, or they're not inevitable, perhaps they are, but they're highly undesirable, and particularly the increase in the cost of education is fueling increased social inequality and decreased social mobility. It's undeniably true across all Western countries. And then we have very long time lags in the production of knowledge. Typically it will take, let's say, 2 years to develop an economics paper, then 3 years to get it published. By the time it's published, it's a completely dead on arrival kind of tombstone certificate type of thing, but that's what we're all about. We're chiseling away at building tombstones. The diffusion of knowledge across disciplines is very flaky and very poor and very, very time-lagged and partial. And we have a lot of knowledge that the public who doesn't have subscriptions to highly priced Elsevier and Wiley and other journals just cannot get access to. I wouldn't mind if this whole publishing nexus was, at the peak of technology and was giving us new digital tools every day of the week, but they've had 20 years to do it and they're still struggling with colour printing, and really difficult things that you or I can do on a 70-pound Hewlett-Packard thing on our desk. So it's not a great picture of technological progress. So that's really the sort of overall setting into which we want to discuss multi-author blogs. And of course I had to define blogs after I discovered that Wikipedia didn't do it very well. A blog is just a website that's set up in chronological order, so the newest stuff comes in at the top and pushes the older stuff further down. Usually it's dated, but doesn't have to be. You can do various things to alter whether that push effect always happens, but that's the first key characteristic. The second is it's very flexible to use, so you can write a blog without having to be, HTML trained and without having the kind of usual palaver associated with most web content management systems, including, sad to say, the latest round of the LSE's content management system, which is just as bad as all the other ones. A blog is very good for incorporating graphics, podcasts, photographs, video, rich media, URL referencing, which is nice referencing because it's unobtrusive, it just sits behind the thing. You just have a different color, you don't need footnotes, you don't need obtrusive Harvard referencing, and so on. And finally, it's very interactive. It's designed to be interactive, it's designed to be shared, it's designed to create a community, and all the things that go with the blog facilitate social networking. So that's my definition of a blog. But what a blog is not is what Wikipedia was defining it as, probably has gone back to defining it as, namely a personal journal. That was true in the early days of blogging, but it's not true now. So really there are three big types of blogs that we need to think about. The traditional one that most people think about is what I call single author blogs. So they're produced by somebody, written by somebody, curated by somebody, put up by somebody on their own individual me type site. And usually in academia, they're talking to just a single discipline because, the people who follow a geographer are all geographers, or the people who follow an economist are mainly economists. Now, a few people do break out of that. People who are linked to media, like Paul Krugman, who's linked to the New York Times, they can be followed by a wide range of different people. But the general rule is single author blogs are single discipline. We've got a few polymaths down here who attract coverage from many disciplines, but not very many. Now then, there are blog sites that are deliberately designed from the outset to be written by lots of people. And the oldest type is this, what I call specialist community feeds, because I'm not really even sure I want to call these blogs. I mean, they're sort of like blogs, but they're also like news feeds and all the other kind of things that have been around for an awfully long time. So there's a specialist community, I don't know, we're interested in semi-presidential election systems, all right? It's quite nerdy and it's on one particular thing. We all know each other, every now and again we meet up at conferences, but it's not really a kind of public domain thing. It's on the web, it's open maybe, but it's really a kind of community news feed. Some of them have got blog formats, many of them have got blog formats, lots of them are still circulating on email and with news feeds and all kinds of mailing list type things. And so the genuine multi-author blog, the thing that I really think is the key, is it's written by lots of people and it's designed to be read by lots of people, and particularly it's designed to be read by lots of people across different disciplines, which is very important in academic life. But it's also designed to be read in many, many cases by just anybody who's a reasonably intelligent, kind of reasonably well-educated person. So it's a sort of open to lay readers kind of style of writing. And this is the kind of blog that I think the future is with us, as people often say. So just to compare single author blogs and multi-author blogs. I mean, single author blogs, if you can do it, is a great thing. Okay, I'm lost in admiration for people who can keep writing regularly and turning over a blog. But I find that a lot of single author blogs become a little bit idiosyncratic, and they, you know, the demands of trying to keep pace with a remorseless readership need can lead you to getting a bit kind of quirky. So you get a lot of mixtures of contents. Some of them are evidence-based, some of them are not, and rather limited amplification in social media. Now, one of the key things if you're going to do networking and community building is to amplify the blog. That's to say, you need to sort of reach out and put people who might be interested in it in contact with it. So all of these things are better, I think, in multi-author blogs. They're professionally edited. People like Chris are actually very rare commodities, you know. People who can help authors to express their ideas clearly and get them across in a really clear way without compromising on the key ideas, and maybe even getting across some of the methods on the data and the evidence as much as you can. Evidence-based, very good for linking to other things like video, podcasts, and so on, which are becoming increasingly feasible as broadband speeds get up. Let's just look at a few differences between the single author and the multi-author thing, particularly in the area of how do you find out what's on a single author blog compared with a multi-author blog. So I thought I'd pick a couple of examples from two other very good universities. One from Warwick, which has 8,600 blogs, some by students, some by staff, some by odds and sods. Now, okay, I get to this page, it tells me you've got 8,600 blogs. What the hell am I supposed to do with it? Well, it's quite well indexed. This is the index for the staff in the English and Comparative Literary Studies. And here we have all their people, you know, sometimes it's called Helen's blog and it's written by Helen Dance. I haven't learnt a hell of a lot from looking at that, but that's all I'm getting, if you see what I mean. So there's a reasonable bunch of them. If I knew who the hell these people were, I might go in. But what am I supposed to do? Check each one after the other? What on earth am I supposed to do with this? It's a model. I've talked to Warwick about this endlessly, and they're still sticky with it, but it seems to be a completely bust, dumb model. Sorry, Warwick, if you're watching. Let's take another institution, Oxford Internet Institute. Now, they're one of the most, you know, hooked up to the internet people you can get in the UK. And this is their blog page. And, okay, so now I'm getting a photo, which I like. There's a little bit more information. But it's still basically just a photo and a name. What am I supposed to do with all these, you know, 20 bloggers? Am I supposed to open them all up and check who's inside and so on and why? And, okay, some of them are posted on the 28th of April. That's really gripping stuff. That's going to be very topical. You know, and I downloaded this yesterday. So I think Oxford will come round, and I believe that Chris is going to get a visit from OII to set up a proper multi-author blog. But, you know, this is a bus model, basically. Even the best people at doing it can't make it work. So what does a multi-author blog look like? Well, this is our Europe blog, which Chris is the editor of. It does European public policy, and it has a brand name. We're trying this. It's a misspelt Europe with 2 P's on the end. Didn't take long for Google to recognize that and stop trying to, you know, replace it with Europe, but did take a little while. But anyway, so this is what it looks like. There are hundreds of contributors on our blogs. About 40% of them from LSE, about 30% are from other universities, about 20% are from think tanks and pressure groups and charities and NGOs, things like this. So this blog is an exercise in knowledge exchange, but it draws on strengths of the LSE. So David Vogel, for example, was through LSE the other day giving a talk, and this is the blog that we managed finally to persuade him to write about how Europe is now defining global regulation. We use URL referencing, so you just put the URL behind that. We've got RSS feeds, Twitter, Facebook. We like to tell people what the popular posts are. So the popular posts are down here, and you can see how many people have read it. So you've got to play back to people as much information as you possibly can about who's using what and how many people are finding it valuable. Let's just shift through. This is another of our most recent blog called LSE Review of Books, which just does new social science books, and it does posts every day of the week, and then we replay them on Sundays on our more substantial blog. Sundays is a big problem for blogs because Saturdays and Sundays people don't log on, so you've got to create some incentive. So we put book reviews on Sundays, try and get them off the Sunday Times. Seems to be working quite well. You need to have an interesting look and feel. I mean, it's not exactly a great book cover, many of them aren't, but some of them are quite interesting, and so we've got a bit of a bookshelf. We've got a Pinterest site for this as well. Again, you always have the popular reviews. We've got latest reviews, popular reviews, disciplines, regions, podcasts, and various other things, academic inspiration. Always like to provide feedback to users on what other users like. This is the top 10 blogs of this week from British Politics and Policy, the top one here being John Van Reenen from Centre for Economic Policy. It's time to move away from policy witchcraft and into an era where evidence is taken seriously. Great blog. If you haven't read that, that's a must-see. And then goes down to something, so that's got like 1,000 odd views, 1,013, and then down at the bottom we've got things with about 100 views. So it's very important to play back to people the maximum information about what other people are finding useful. And on the whole, you can prowl government and university websites, never get the slightest clue about what people are finding useful. Of course, you need to have a Facebook arm for the thing. This is the Facebook page for British Politics and Policy, which has built up sort of 630 likes and a very good traffic. I love the new Facebook narrative chronological thing. It's really just great for blogs, and you can put in photos and so on. Sadly, we have a problem with getting the right number of women onto our blogs, but we seem to be doing at least better than academia in general. But I had to scout around for a few pages to show you that it wouldn't be just men. And then you need to have a vigorous Twitter stream. So this is the Twitter page for Politics and Policy. You can see it has 10,389 followers. I think it's gone up since then. This was last afternoon, which puts it probably about 8th or 9th in the list of UK think tank type sites in terms of Twitter following. Now, how you do your Twitter, there's a very wonderful guide written by some of the team called the Twitter Guide, which you can find on our Impacts blog. And basically, we tend to go for, well, on British Politics and Policy, we tend to go for a more corporate style, and on Europe, and then on other ones like the Review of Books, edited by much funkier, younger female people. They go for more of a community, chatty kind of style. So you've got to sort of pick your style and suit it to the audience and see what works and what doesn't work. But what you need to do is tweet everything several times. Don't forget that the USA comes online when we're all off home, so you need to set it up on TweetDeck and tweet through the night. Don't over-tweet, or people get annoyed. They soon let you know if you're tweeting too much. The same thing. Okay, so that's basically single-author blogs and multi-author blogs. And then just to sort of move on to the new republic of multi-author blogs and Twitter, basically. I was going to call it that, but then I thought it would put you off and you wouldn't come. Okay, so what do multi-author blogs do? First of all, they speed everything up, because if you have ideas, you can get them out there pretty quickly. And they socialize ideas, because you know, when you're thinking about ideas on your own, and when you're thinking about ideas that you're going to represent to people, maybe, you know, tomorrow morning, that makes a huge difference to the way in which you do things. You're more careful, but you're also a lot faster. You can pilot test ideas really quickly. It doesn't take very long to see what works. You can get feedback and steer. I can't tell you how many blogs I thought would do well, posted them up, had quickly discovered that they sank without trace. So, you know, at least that's negative feedback, but it's some indication of what works and what doesn't work. And actually that's incredibly hard to get in academic life, and an awful lot of the problems of academic life is people beavering away for far too long over things that were never going to work or never going to have much of an audience. Again, if you look at Google Scholar citations, you know, you tend to see this power law decline. So everybody has a few well-cited things, then you get down very quickly to the things that are cited by nobody at all. And I look through my list, and you know, it stretches to hundreds of entries that have never been cited by anybody, even me. And I'm thinking, oh no, why did I spend months, years of my life doing things that were never going to work? So, you know, anything that makes us more usefully productive is important. Blogs are like 24-hour TV. They pull academics out of their little hidey holes and put them in public display, and that's good. We've got a huge amount of academic knowledge that creates what we call a dynamic knowledge inventory. We call it a dynamic knowledge inventory because the first time we called it just a knowledge inventory, and a business guy who was there, we did this for the British Academy, said, well, you know, inventory is unsold goods. We don't want lots and lots of inventory. You know, so we said, yes, but it's knowledge. And he said, yes, but it's inventory. So now we call it dynamic knowledge inventory to show that we're turning over the ideas. But inherently, a lot of ideas and expertise sits around, is not terrifically used until sometime something comes up and we suddenly need to know about, I don't know, what's going on in Azerbaijan because it's the Eurovision Song Contest there next week, or what's going on in the Ukraine on the far right because of the football competition. Do you see what I mean? So the ability to actually pull out this information quickly in a timely way, get it into public debate, is a huge plus point for universities. So most academics know a lot of things, and they tell each other these things over the lunch in the senior dining room, and then it never goes anywhere else. And with blogging, we can actually pull all that useful stuff out and push it out, and a lot of it will go a lot further and have useful implications. Blogs are great for communicating with external audiences, so long as they're not self-authored, single-author blogs. If they're multi-author blogs, then you're getting out there into an interdisciplinary context and you're reaching lay people. A lot of academics sit here, you know, in LSE. You see a reference to a journal, you just click, it goes whiz, whiz, whiz through the library systems and you're there. But if you're in business, businesses don't pay for journals, never, hardly anything. And government doesn't subscribe to most journals either. And nor does civil society, charities, interest groups, and all the many other hundreds of social interests who could benefit. So if it's in journals, behind paywalls, it's not anywhere. If it's not on the open web, you should have an open web version of everything that you've ever published, you know, either in the LSE Research Online or in a blog, or both, ideally. And the problem is that universities are sort of educating people, giving people certificates, they go off and get a job, they work in business or government. They're very educated, intelligent people. They know a lot, and then we never ask them for anything. We never ask them for their views, we never get anything back from them, we never re-engage them. They're just, you know, get to have a cocktail at an alumni event every once in 10 years. But that's actually a huge pool of talent and expertise and ongoing knowledge, which could be coming back into academia. And that's what a knowledge exchange type blog does. Because, you know, a huge amount of the content is going to come to you from people who've gone to other universities, and it's also going to come to you from people who are in professional, business or government careers who have a really great stock of knowledge or expertise that wouldn't otherwise be captured. And this is so important for, you know, human-dominated systems. The difference, a lot of people think about the world in terms of, you know, physical sciences, social sciences, humanities. It's better to think about human-dominated systems. We live in a world that is increasingly dominated by humanity, for good or bad. So things like medicine, IT, engineering are as much human-dominated systems as all of the social sciences. Actually, because we've obliterated most of nature now, there's not all that much left in terms of autonomous natural systems. You have to become a, you know, astronomer to be dealing with systems that are not critically subject to human interference now. So the ability that we have to recapture that material and bring it back in, and bring it back in a holistic, joined up, integrated way that deals with, you know, joined up, integrated problems that we have, is absolutely critical for the next few decades of human development. And of course, multi-author blogs have a great role in speeding up and accelerating cross-disciplinary learning because they're just more readable, you know. You don't have to wade through a whole set of hard-boiled disciplinary things. How do disciplines work? Well, here's my quick picture. Every discipline, without exception, has 3 zones in it. And the number 1 zone, the zone that's professionally dominant, is always dead, intellectually dead, not changing, dead as a doornail, really. It's just the way that disciplines are. So this is the area where you need, you know, a £1 million project to replicate something that we did last year, just to check to see if, you know, what happened last year is the same as it did this year. This is where the professors sit with their great research projects and their 12 RAs and so on. This is where the big labs are. They're all busily busting each other's pharmacological patents, you know. But basically, it's not changing knowledge. It's dead, pretty dead stuff. It's necessary, but nothing much is changing. And then around this, we have the area of moderate advance, where enterprising young scholars and PhD people tend to group much more heavily, and a good place for them to group too. Very good, very good. I'm a huge believer in the value of PhDs. You know, give me £3 million research project, a couple of PhDs. I prefer the PhDs actually every time. But anyway, the zone of moderate advance. So it's not the dead heart, because they haven't got the resources to enter into the dead heart. You know, the entry price for the dead heart is very high. And this is where people are beavering away, doing interesting things, and making modest and useful, but not all that, you know, more moderate and controlled advances. And finally, the Wild West of every discipline is on the frontiers with another discipline. And this is the zone of really interesting, innovative work. This is a zone where people pick up an idea, take it for a walk, put it down somewhere else, and whew, it does a lot of business for them. And, you know, this is the zone where people invent Facebook or whatever it is. It's very much on the interface between disciplines. And all the rapid forefront research that's being done right across the world, to my mind, is being done on interfaces between disciplines. And most of it has this character of pick up an idea that's already quite well known and well developed, take it somewhere else, put it down, it works quite well. So for example, the Gherkin skyscraper in Britain, which won the best British award, was just a kind of a round skyscraper with a little dome top. It wasn't like a stroke of genius to get there, but nobody had done it before, right? And then it was beautifully executed and so on. A lot of intellectual work is like that. So that's why interdisciplinarity is very, very important. The other big area we need to think about is, well, you know, conventional publishing and so on. This is a slide that I took from a guy called Jason Priam, who's one of the gurus of altmetrics and sort of king of the alternate academia world. And he was trying to sort of, this is from a talk he gave a couple of weeks ago called Publishers, What Are They Good For? And the answer, of course, is not very much. So he has this kind of levels of things that they do: archiving, dissemination, certification, and these are the different criteria that he had. Now, I'm kind of assuming I know what he said because I haven't actually listened to the whole podcast, but let me just try and show you how multi-author blogs address some of these. Let's just take the basic storage and retrieval and identification function. So publishers say, well, you know, we publish your book or we publish your journal article, you'll always be able to find it, you've got an ongoing institutional commitment. We can do all that. We just need the digital online identity number, and we need, if you deposit it in LSE Research Online, that's got an institutional commitment. It's you know, instantly web accessible on the open web and does all of that stuff just as well. And then, of course, if you publish in, certainly if you publish in one of our multi-author blogs, everything we do goes into LSE Research Online. From LSE Research Online, it goes into Google Scholar. It's in there. How long does it take, Chris?
No time at all.
Yeah. So certainly within, you know, 3 or 4 weeks of the whatever the Research Online thing is, next day Google Scholar will have it, and then it's sitting in your Google Scholar citations page, which you've all got, I'm sure. If not, get one. Then there's the thing about preparing. Well, you know, publishers are always going on about how they do a great job editing it, and they're very careful, and they have good standards. Well, we're not the world's best editors, but we reckon we've got just as good a standards on our blogs. And as for the other things, publishers are just, you know, a nightmare to deal with on anything to do with digital. They can't put in graphics, they can't put in video, they can't link to podcasts, they can't do URL referencing. They've had like 20 years to do URL referencing, and they still cannot do it. I still get things coming back from publishers now going, oh, you've got a lot of web things in the bibliography, couldn't you cut them out? You know, it's just unbelievable. And when it comes to, well, just take a simple example. This was a chart I sent to, you know, a reasonably up there kind of political science journal called Party Politics, which I'm on the editorial board and very fond. And then I had interactions stretching over 3 months with editors and designers located in India, at the end of which they managed to convert it into this. Now, you know, of the two, which do I prefer? This or this? Well, I prefer this. It's just done on Excel. It's not like, you know, the world's best, but it's got colour and it's very clear. Whereas by the time we get to here, it's black and white and it's messed around and it's not perfect anymore. So I'm not sure what the value added that publishers add is, you know. If we then look down the rest, publication, you don't need publishers. Blogs are very fast. Send us a blog and it's topical. We'll have it up next day. They're better amplified via social media and they get more responses. For search, you don't really need publishers anymore. Catalogues almost have no information in. I'm a big fan of Google Scholar and Harsing, which are two sort of ways of looking at a whole life profile of everything that anybody's ever done. So if you're meeting a new academic contact or something, that's the quickest, easiest way to understand their whole Well, publishers do have reach and brand and reputation, and it's very difficult for single author blogs to match that, but university multi-author blogs can match that, and that's why we're paying a lot more attention to branding. Then the question is feedback. Well, if you wait in economics to get feedback from your published journal work, you'd never do anything. You know, the timeline would be 5 years. Feedback was 2 years ago. The world has changed. Everything you see in a journal, as I say to my PhD students, is light from a distant star. It's what the world used to be 4 years ago. Whereas anything you see in a blog is what the world used to be yesterday, which is a lot more useful to you, especially in the social sciences. And that leaves us with, what do journals do? They certify people, basically. They help people to get tenure. In the old days, the completely corrupt concept of an impact factor was part and parcel of that, but now even that has been banned from the REF and the Australian equivalent of the REF. So, you know, I think we've got into a very invidious position where we're forcing young academics to chase pointless certification and delaying their productivity in the very crucial years when they're most productive in many other ways. So it's a bit invidious. That gets me to what's now the standard publication chain. It doesn't really matter whether you do books, journal articles, conference papers or research papers. These are the long-form publications, and incidentally books are variegating and so on. We've been discussing some of this in our impacts blog. But you need to push them into a short-form publication that's an open web and interpretable, reachable by people from lots of different disciplines, and for which you get the maximum kind of feedback. And then you need to incorporate them into a professional news stream, of which Twitter is the dominant one. 15% of the UK population on Twitter now, much less in Europe, much more in the USA. But Twitter is the key thing. So this is really the sort of standard publication chain, and it should really free people up to do an awful lot more quickly and to get much better at what they do. I thought I'd leave you with a quote from a recent article in the New York Times by Larry Summers that came from a talk he gave at Harvard. And he's talking about change in higher education, but it's something that I think is true of every digitizing industry, of which higher education is just one. Things take longer to happen than you think they will. Okay, you always see lots of stuff and it goes, this is going to change, this is going to change, this is going to change, and it doesn't, and it doesn't, and it doesn't. And then they happen faster than you thought they could. And then they really rush through. And that's really the message I have for you. So if you're sitting there thinking, another blue skies enthusiast, we are on the cusp. We're definitely about to enter a period of very rapid change. And the Republic of Blogs can be part of that. Thanks for listening. And if you want to follow up, if you're not a fan already of our Impacts of the Social Sciences website, blog site, you'll find that there's tons and tons more by lots and lots of people. More or less all saying the same thing, but still. Thanks.
Patrick, thank you very much indeed for that stimulating discussion. I hope you're willing to take questions now. Yep. When you ask a question, please can you wait for the microphone to come? I appreciate you don't need it in this room, but it's not for this room. It's for people who are outside listening online. So please do wait until the mic reaches you. Questions for Patrick, please. Okay, whilst people are thinking, oh, you've got one here. I was going to ask one. One moment.
Hi, very interesting, thank you. I got 2 or 3 questions, but let me ask you the one that came to my mind first of all. Discussing in blogs, discussing online, it's like replacing conversations in cafes, I suppose, really. It's the new way of doing that. Who owns the ideas? Supposing somebody came up with an idea that fed into, let's say, the originator's thinking, then who actually then owns the end product if somebody actually gave the idea? Where does the copyright lie?
Okay, well, on copyright, I didn't discuss it because, on the whole, I find copyright incredibly too boring. But the standard copyright we have on the blog is Creative Commons copyright. And this is what, most people now would recommend. This provides safeguards against what we might call large-scale commercial looting of your ideas, but it doesn't provide you with any safeguard against people picking up an idea. There is no copywriting of an idea. So if you comment, you know, it's part of the general intellectual debate. And the safeguard against people running off with your ideas is to get your ideas out there first. That's what I would say. You know, I think the whole intellectual property right thing is another dimension of what's wrong with the existing publishing and other models, and it's a very sad commentary on academic professions, that they have colluded for so long with people like Elsevier and Wiley and so on, the big journal producers, in a system that you know, normally contributes about 80–85% of professions' income comes from journals that they are running with commercial publishers and selling at very high prices. So I think, you know, it's part and parcel of what's wrong with academia at the moment. It's part of the academic malaise is that professions and so on have been too implicated in very restrictive, anti-public interest intellectual property rights. So I think, you know, the more people shift towards Creative Commons, the more we ought to be able to marginalise these kinds of problems.
Okay, thank you. And the other one, that sort of leads in then, in a way, to my second question, which really has 2 points. It's like to do with the ethics over all of this, I suppose. And there's something very Orwellian about all of this, because with the editing that's going on, huge chunks of what's been said can be removed. And then a denial can come and say, you never said that, and it doesn't exist anymore, at least not in the blogosphere, but it does in print. So then, if people need to sort of refer to what was said in the conversation online, and that's been edited out, then how can citations work?
Okay, that's an interesting point. When we started our Europe blog, Chris will remember this, we had a blog from a leading German blogger. And we did our usual kind of editing job, which is to cut it down to 1,200 words instead of 1,700 words, to cut out all the sort of wrong English grammar that German people tend to speak, to add in a narrative heading and to add in an intro. And then we published it, and he was absolutely outraged and wrote a great blog, which we were happy to see echoing around the European blogosphere about how blogs should be chaotic, badly written, and you know, they should express the authentic first random thoughts of people, and you know, you shouldn't interfere with this. Well, I think that's, you know, that's perfectly legitimate if you want to write on a single author blog. But I think if you're writing for a multi-author blog, there is going to be some editing. So I don't think that the kind of editing that hopefully we do normally, if we do any extensive editing, we will run it by the author, and on the whole the authors, you know, are fine with it. Sometimes they change small things, but they very rarely change anything major. That does mean that editing has to be done by staff who are very close to the field. So not by people in the external relations division or the press office, because they'll make a complete mess of it if they try and do any kind of detail editing on their own. It's got to be done in academic departments. It's got to be part and parcel of the life of academic departments. It doesn't have to be done by huge experts, just, you know, somebody with a good graduate education, master's or a PhD. Now then there's the issue of, well, how do you archive all this? And I saw some guidelines the other day from the Modern Language Association on how to reference tweets, which is just to, you know, basically reproduce the whole tweet, which is a good way of doing it. And of course you can publish a tweet, then you can delete it. It's still there in some ways, but the British Library, for example, doesn't have legal rights to acquire tweets and Twitter outputs at the moment, because they are, as usual, you know, 10 years behind the times. there is a problem, and you can also, you know, if you do something and you make a mistake, you can get on your blog you know, we very often publish the blog and then we'll clean it up and change it within a few hours of it being put up. So I think it depends really on the ethics of the editorial team. We think that you should be allowed to have a period when you put it up and then you know, edit, or the author has a few second thoughts before it gets committed, for example, to LSE Research Online and then goes on to Google Scholar and things. After that, I'm not suggesting that you edit the blog, right? I'm not suggesting you say, Hollande will win when you really said Sarkozy will win, right? If you said Sarkozy, you know, it's one of my colleagues, during the height of the London riots, at the end of the first evening, published a blog which said 99% of London isn't burning. Sadly, that percentage had gone down very significantly by the next afternoon. But anyway, you know, so you've got to have those kind of, I think that you know, you've got to capture that. And part of what you may get from a multi-author blog is a lot more of that. Because actually the stuff that you see that's been endlessly edited and re-edited and published years later has all been edited as well. You know, it's like, so we're hoping, for example, to bring out an e-book on the riots that will have all the 65 blogs that we ran during the riots at every stage, including the ones that were completely wrong. But that is very important to capture a lot more of the ethos of what was going on, what the discussion was about, what the genuine areas of uncertainty were. So I don't think there's anything here that's, you know, more of a problem than anywhere else. In fact, I think there's a lot less of a problem.
I was curious in the part you mentioned in how you manage this, because you mentioned you have an editorial team. Someone has to more or less centralize, manage Twitters and stuff. So I just wanted more kind of details in how you manage. You have two different editorial teams. You just circulate people inside. You just have to, you know, have the money to put a new editor. I was curious.
Okay, that's a very good question. Yeah, so editing a blog is not, you know, especially a multi-author blog, especially a large one that's got, you know, 300 or 400 authors, is posting every day, some of our blogs are posting 3 times a day now on the British Politics blog, 3 times a day, every day of the week, every week of the year. Even on Sundays we'll post 2 or 3 things. Europe is posting a couple of blogs a day, and you know, particularly in the early phase of developing a blog, you have to put in a lot of effort, and you have to have a lot of work on building the online community, tweeting out, getting into information networks, getting people to contribute. All of that takes a huge amount of time. And as you go on, you will find that it gets easier. Once you've got an online identity and a community, it can actually be surprisingly easy to keep the content flowing and so on. And people very quickly, once they've seen it, once they've read it, they get an idea of what the style is and so on, and they see how it's being read and they see what's useful. People begin to contribute in a much better way. So that you know, it's like a very short 6 months intensive work, and then you should be seeing it ease off. So you need to do your blog planning in terms of those things. You need to set up a launch that really has impact. Don't launch into nothing, you know. Start a Twitter account, announce you're going to do it. We think about 8 weeks before you're going to do it, and then try and build up a Twitter following so that you've got a sort of a base to begin with. And think about having a few sample blogs earlier on so people can get an idea before it goes really live. And then you need to build up a whole stretch of 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of a backlog of stuff that you can do, but obviously not too much too early, because otherwise it goes off the board. So there's a whole series of things you need to do, and all of that takes some resources. Now our blogs at the moment are funded, 3 of them are funded by the LSE's Higher Education Innovation Fund, which is a fund that everybody in LSE can apply for, and other universities have their own equivalents. And this is exactly to, you know, seed corn money for new innovations. So that's very useful. If you've got a research project, another of our blogs, the Impact blog, comes from a big research project that we're running. Originally we had some budget in to start a website. After this first blog started working, we thought, no, let's not have a website, let's do a blog instead. Basically for each of our blogs we have like one person working on them full time. Very young people are best because they know a lot more about digital technology than old fogies like me, and you know they're also very plugged in and so on. And the technology keeps moving, so you've got to be ready to move with it. It will change every 6 months. There'll be new things that you will. Would you say that's fair?
Pinterest, for example, didn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. So Pinterest, for example, is a very good way of holding lots and lots of photos, and huge numbers of academics have huge numbers of photos that they haven't actually communicated to anybody, which could be very, very useful and so on. And there'll be certainly new disruptive technologies. So Twitter is still sort of pushing its way across Europe at the moment and is still not very developed. If you'd said to me 2 years ago, I've got this thing, you can send little messages to people in 140 characters. How useful is that going to be in academic life? I'd have said, utterly useless. Not in 1,000 years will that have. And yet, you know, it's very, very important already. So I think, you know, you need to think about this. The longer run thing then is, well, how can you create a permanent thing? Now this is something that we don't know what the answer is. But I'm a great believer in academic life of start and then see where the money comes from a bit later on. Do you know what I mean? If you can possibly do it, if you can get some initial funding, get cracking, and then you'll see what works and what doesn't work. I'm pinning a lot of hope at the moment on the Research Excellence Framework, which, as you know, requires universities to submit one impact case study for every 10 academics. Now, and each of the academics has to submit 4 publications. So that's one impact case study for every 40 articles. If you do the maths, you'll find that at current rates, a good 4-star impact case study, which in the stupid terminology of the ref has probably got to be world-beating or internationally superstar case study, whatever it is, I don't know what they call it, but very, very top-ranked, that could earn a university that did it £630,000 over 5 years. So I think there's a potential for being able to, you know, create a self-sustaining finance loop for important blogs and academic developments that can be shown to have worked in terms of expanding external impact. That's what I'm hoping very much at the moment. And it will take a huge amount of time to get funding out of doing dead stupid things, you know, which academic institutions are just as bad as every other institution in terms of, you know, funding the horse-drawn cavalry long after people have invented machine guns, you know, that make it completely useless. So we've got loads of money being spent on the wrong things, and getting out of the wrong things and into the right things is going to take time, and that's why you need these innovation funds and so on. You've got to mainstream the production of blogs.
Hello. I was concerned about how one, as a pedestrian on the information superhighway, might actually establish authority from blogs. One of the functions that's provided by a journal that you didn't list is peer review. And while it's probably easy for somebody to say, okay, well, this is an institutional blog, it belongs to LSE, therefore, you know, they probably wouldn't allow it to carry that branding were it to be full of falsehoods. There are very well-funded bodies around the world who can produce high-quality material of high-quality appearance, but is essentially demonstrably false. I'm thinking of things like in things that set out to disprove anthropogenic climate change. How would you answer the charge that it's very difficult to gauge quality and authority in blogs?
Yeah, well, whenever you have a new system of authority, the people who belong to the old system of authority say, oh, your new system of authority is chaotic and anarchic and doesn't work. But we know that there are huge limits with peer review. I mean, I've edited the UK Political Sciences, Association's top journal, and like every other editor of every journal right across the world, I would say about 20% of the material we published was good stuff, and 80% was pretty dreadful. So peer review has, produced a very conservative academic culture, which is very often orientated towards the wrong values, and particularly isn't orientated towards the right values of, encouraging creativity and innovation. Peer review is basically, you send me your article, I'll send it to 3 or 4 people. Out of the 4 people, maybe 2 people will respond. Of the 2 people, maybe one of them will be sane and one of them will be bonkers, or one of them will be fair-minded and one of them won't. And I'll then try and make the best editorial decision I can. It's not a great system. It certainly isn't a gold star system. The level of retractions and, people withdrawing articles and fakes and so on is quite high. On the whole, you can get all of that quality control just as quickly in the blogosphere, and you'll get it, a lot more quickly and a lot more instantly, and you'll have many more eyeballs on it. So I think that there is a need in some areas to move towards a kind of more open style of peer review. So I think we could move to a situation where you have like peer review of a preliminary kind, then stuff gets published, and then there's a period of critique and commentary by anybody. And that, I think, would be a lot more productive and a lot more useful. Well, or by anybody in the community, or by anybody who's given status within that community. So there might be various levels of peer review. But the existing system is a completely bust and useless system. And, I have almost no faith in it in my own discipline. I have a little bit of faith in it in things like medicine, but if you look at that whole thing, you'll find that most of the work in medicine, for example, is being done by regulatory controls and regulatory agencies. It's not really being done by peer review. So, I think you can imagine that some blogs will move towards peer review, and you could have longer form blogs as well that were peer reviewed, but much faster, and probably would use a sort of open kind of peer review model. I think it's a bit tricky for things like government and so on, but government is very schizophrenic. On the one hand, you have people in government who say, well, it's got to be peer reviewed or we're not going to take any notice of it. Let's say the chief officer for health or something. On the other hand, you have people who say it's government by Google. The minister wants something by tomorrow afternoon. What do? I go out and hit Google and just take, I think you'd be better off with some multi-author blogs in the mix than just take it off Google. And I think, we will find ways of understanding the new, what's valuable and what's not valuable in the new academic paradigm. So, over time, we'd hope, for example, that our blogs will become well-established, branded, reputable blogs. At least that this is, we don't say we agree with it when we publish it, but we won't publish it if it's completely wrong or misleading, or if there's anything, doubtful about the alleged evidence or the argument. So, I think we're just at the beginning of establishing how we certify knowledge in this new setup. Well, it doesn't mean we have to cling on to the old setup if the old setup isn't working and takes years to operate and is very defective anyway. So I'd say 80% of peer-reviewed stuff And, you know, there have been very good studies that show the same thing, that 80% of peer-reviewed stuff is either trivial or it's replication. It just says the world is the way it was yesterday or the last time this was looked at. It's hard-boiled, but it's not necessarily valuable.
Okay. Patrick, I'm going to take advantage and ask the last question, as we're going to have to bring it to a halt. One of the very, very important elements of a blog is it's not simply a one-way means of communication. You've talked about the development of multi-author blogs, which are a curated environment, but I think what is also very important is to think about the discussion and the comment and the debate that can be engendered around that original posting. Now, I'd like to ask you whether you think there's merit in considering perhaps we also need a mechanism or better mechanisms to curate this kind of discussion. I'm thinking of the example of Conagirti's blog, for example, where he would have people responding to initial posts, and that in a sense would seed the debate and discussion and help pull it along hopefully fruitful lines. So do you think that as part of a process of widening this dialogue and indeed deepening our understanding, we need actually to think about how we deal with the other side of a blog and engender better discussion, comment around the original article?
Okay, well, I think it's the whole area of commentary and feedback and so on has been problematic in academia for a hugely long time. And if you're a journal editor, you always hope that somebody will comment on published work and articles. They never ever do. Commentary, I think, tends to be an area that I tread a little bit carefully in. I mean, I'm interested in discursive and deliberative debate, but I don't necessarily think that a lot of intense, you know, analysing of what somebody has said is necessarily the way to go forward. So on all our blogs, we basically we don't have open commentary.
No.
We have, you know, we have a system where you can post a comment and you can see what it will look like, and then we decide whether we're going to agree with the comment. Now, we also have an ethic of basically putting up most comments, but there are certain things that we don't do. We don't put up any, you know, troll type stuff, inflammatory stuff, insults, anything like that. We'll just knock it back to the person and say it doesn't meet our guidelines, but if you want to get it, and there's a process they can appeal to if they don't like that. And I think we get a reasonable number of comments, but not massive numbers of comments on our blogs. So, you know, I think most people comment by way of writing their own blog. So I think that's the you know, discursive progress and deliberation is very interactive over the lifetime of the blog, not on the, you know, so you can, if you pull up, let's say, Times Higher Education article, there are a lot of comments on the bottom, but most of them are trolling and rather unfortunate, I think, you know, usually insulting academics, which of course is a good thing. But
Okay, at that point I'd like to bring proceedings to a close. I'd like to sincerely thank Patrick for what's been a very interesting and illuminating session. So in the traditional way, let's give him another round of applause.